I didn't in Oppos. T moved to the backwoods of Wyoming to start a war. I moved here for the kind of silence that stays in your bones, for the way the frost sits on the sagebrush at sunrise, and the only neighbors I have to worry about are the elk moving through the timber. But less than a month into my retirement, a thick manila envelope showed up in my rusted-out mailbox, demanding $120,000 in quote, delinquent fees, in quote, from a homeowners association I'd never even heard of, and that was the moment I realized someone was trying to steal the dirt right out from under my feet. See, I spent 35 years as a forensic auditor for the Department of Justice, a job where you learn that the biggest monsters don't live under your bed. They live inside the fine print of a contract, hiding in plain sight behind a desk and a title. So when I bought this 600-acre slice of heaven we call the High Ridge Ranch, I did my homework. I spent 6 months digging through county records and historical plats going back to the late 1800s, ensuring every square inch was free and clear, no liens, no easements, and definitely no HOA within 20 miles of my fence line. I paid cash for the place, every penny I'd saved from a lifetime of chasing white-collar crooks, just so I could finally wake up and not have to answer to a single soul. But apparently, a woman named Beatrice Sterling didn't at Oppos. To get the memo. The letter was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock with an embossed gold seal that screamed, in quote, "I'm important and expensive," in quote, and it stated with a level of arrogance that made my blood run cold that my ranch was actually, in quote, Parcel 409C, in quote, of the Shadow Creek Estates, an association that was supposedly formed back in 2005. The math was insane. They were claiming 20 years of unpaid dues, interest, special assessments for a community pool I'd never seen, and, in quote, landscaping fees, in quote, for a road that ended 3 miles before my driveway even started, and it was signed by Beatrice as the, in quote, President and Chief Enforcement Officer, in quote, with a signature so sharp it looked like it could draw blood. I didn't in Oppos. To get angry at first, I actually laughed because I figured it was just some clerical error or a computer glitch at the county office, so I sat down at my old oak desk, drafted a polite but firm letter explaining that they had the wrong guy, attached copies of my deed and the official county survey, and sent it off certified mail, thinking that would be the end of it. But in this world, some people don and Oppos. T want the truth. They want the power that comes from ignoring it. 3 days later, I was out by the north fence, checking on a section of wire the wind had knocked loose, when I saw a shiny white Range Rover crawling up my private dirt road, kicking up dust like it owned the place. And out stepped a woman who looked like she'd been professionally vacuum sealed into a designer hiking outfit. She didn't in Oppos. T say hello. She didn't in Oppos. T asked if I was the owner. She just held up a clipboard and said, in quote, Mr. Miller, you're in violation of Section 4, Paragraph B of the Shadow Creek Covenant. That fence you're fixing ISN and Oppos. T in approved style, and we're going to have to fine you an additional $500 a day until it's replaced with white vinyl. End quote. I just stood there, my wire cutter still in my hand, and I looked at her for a long minute before I said, end quote, Mind Oppos, M. I don an Oppos. T know who you think you are, but this is private land. You're trespassing, and if you don an Oppos, T get that overpriced mall crawler off my property in the next 60 seconds. The only thing you'll be into Oppos, enforcing an Oppos, is a call to the sheriff, and quote, she didn't Oppos. T flinch. She just gave me this thin, pitying smile, the kind of look you give a child who doesn't an Oppos. T understand he's lost a game. And she whispered, and quote, oh, Elias, we've already filed the annexation papers with the new board. You're part of the family now, whether you like it or not. And we always collect our debts, end quote. That's when the quiet auditor in me woke up, the one who knows that if you want to kill a snake, you don an Oppos. T chop at the tail, you find out where it's hiding its eggs, so I went back to the courthouse, but this time I didn't in Oppos. T go to the public records room. I went to the basement where they keep the digital metadata logs, because I had a hunch. You see, Beatrice wasn't in Oppos. T just some overzealous neighbor. She was a failed real estate developer who'd bought up the land south of me. And she'd realized that if she could, in quote, absorb, in quote, my ranch into her struggling HOA, she could use my property value to secure a massive bridge loan to save her dying subdivision. It was a classic land grab, but she'd made one fatal mistake. She assumed I was just a tired, old man who'd be too intimidated by a gold seal to fight back. I spent the next week living on black coffee and microfilm, and what I found was chilling. It turns out Beatrice had bribed a clerk in the zoning office, a guy named Gary who had a gambling habit, to, in quote, slip and quote, an amended plat map into the official records at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, a map that showed my ranch as part of her estates. But as a forensic guy, I know that digital footprints never lie, and when I looked at the file history, the, in quote, official, in quote, map had been uploaded from a private IP address registered to Sterling Development's main office, not the county server. It was a digital forgery, a felony-level play for a 600-acre prize. But Beatrice was and oppos. T done playing dirty, because the next morning I woke up to find my main gate, the only way in or out of the ranch, had been blocked by two massive concrete K-rails, the kind they use on highways, and there was a deputy sheriff sitting there in his cruiser, looking bored. I walked down there, heart pounding in my ears, and the deputy, a young kid named Miller who probably had an oppos. He'd been on the job 6 months, told me he had an, in quote, emergency court order, in quote, signed by a circuit judge, stating that since I was in quote, material breach, in quote, of the HOA contract, my access was being restricted for, in quote, safety reasons, in quote, until a hearing could be held. I looked at the signature on that order, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Wyoming wind. The name on the bottom was Judge Arthur Sterling, Beatrice's own brother-in-law. At that point, most people would have broken. They would have paid the, in quote, fees, in quote, or sold the land just to make the nightmare stop. But they didn't in oppos. T realized that for 35 years, my job was to be the most patient man in the room. So I didn't in oppos. T screamed, I didn't in oppos. T threatened the deputy. I just took a photo of the order and called man I had in oppos. T spoken to in 10 years. A former U.S. attorney named Silas Vance who specialized in RICO cases. I told Silas, in quote, I've got a developer forging county maps, a clerk taking bribes, and a judge signing illegal orders to facilitate a land grab, end quote. And Silas just let out a low whistle and said, end quote, Elias, that's not an HOA dispute. That's a criminal enterprise. How fast can you give me the metadata? End quote. The climax didn't end oppos. T happened in a courtroom. Not at first. It happened at the Shadow Creek, end quote, annual general meeting, end quote. A fancy gala Beatrice had organized a local country club to announce her, end quote, expansion, end quote. To the other homeowners, the ones who had no idea their dues were being used to fund a criminal conspiracy. I walked in there wearing my dirty ranch boots and a canvas coat, clutching my leather laptop bag, and I waited until Beatrice was on stage, soaking in the applause, talking about, end quote, increasing property values, end quote, and, end quote, community integrity, end quote. I stood up in the back and yelled, end quote, hey Beatrice, does an oppos, community integrity and oppos, usually involve bribing Gary in the zoning office at 2 in the morning? Or is that just a special perk of your presidency? End quote. The room went so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the cocktail glasses, and Beatrice turned a shade of white that matched her Range Rover. She tried to have security toss me out, but that's when Silas Vance walked in with 2 federal marshals and a subpoena that was 3 inches thick. We didn't in oppos. T just have the maps. We had the bank records showing the wire transfers from Sterling Development to Gary's offshore account. And we had the audio from A, quote, trail cam, quote. I'd hidden near my gate that caught Beatrice and the judge laughing about, quote, squeezing the old man until he bleeds dirt, quote. Seeing her face fall as Silas started reading the charges of racketeering, wire fraud, and tampering with public records was the most satisfying thing I've ever witnessed. It turned out she had been doing this for years to smaller landowners, but they'd all been too scared to say anything. She'd built a kingdom on a foundation of lies, and I was the one who finally pulled the thread that unraveled the whole tapestry. The aftermath was a bloodbath in the local government. Gary flipped on the judge flipped on Beatrice, and the Shadow Creek Estates HOA was dissolved by a court-appointed receiver 3 weeks later, but the most interesting part was the Edelment. Since they'd used the HOA's name to commit the fraud, the insurance bond had to pay out, and every single homeowner who'd been bullied into paying fake fines got their money back with interest. As for me, I bought the empty lot next to the subdivision entrance and turned it into A, quote, Landowner Advocacy Center, quote, a place where people can go for free to learn how to check their deeds, and protect themselves from people like Beatrice. I even kept one of those concrete K-rails she used to block my gate. I had it moved to the front of my ranch, and I painted a sign on it that says, in quote, "Private land, no bullies allowed," end quote. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night, and I want to hear what you all think about this. Even after the feds arrested her, even after the evidence was laid out for the whole town to see, there were still people in that subdivision who supported her. They actually complained that without Beatrice's, in quote, strict rules, end quote, the neighborhood would go to hell and their house prices would drop. They were willing to overlook forgery, bribery, and the theft of a man's home as long as it kept their lawns green and their, in quote, status, end quote, high. And it makes me wonder, is the real problem the people who crave power or the people who are so afraid of losing a little bit of comfort that they'll let a tyrant run the show? I'm back at the high ridge now. The silence is back, and the elk are moving through the timber again, but I don into oppos. To look at my neighbors the same way anymore because I know that a gold seal and a nice smile can hide a lot of rot. So tell me, have you ever dealt with a, in quote, small town king, in quote, who thought they were above the law? And did you have the guts to stand your ground? Or is it easier to just pay the fine and look the other way? Drop a comment below. I'm reading every single one because the only way we keep our land free is if we keep our eyes open.